yeah, 10 seconds from now.
Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me for this first webinar in Enriching Literacy Practice in Foundation to Year 8. My name is Danny Heineman and I will be your host in this three-part webinar series. This afternoon we go into great depth, detail in relation to the workshop model. Next Wednesday at the same time we'll hold webinar 2, which flows from this session into formative assessment. And the third part to the series is a live panel on September the 8th. So it's been a tough couple of years for us here in Victoria with the many challenges of the pandemic. Wherever you are across Victoria this evening, I hope you're coping all right and that you enjoy this evening's presentation. If there is anything from this session that you would like to follow up with me, please send me an email. I will have my email again towards the end of the presentation. But maybe try and jot that down. You'll notice in the WebEx that I'm Daniel, or on the YouTube channel. I am definitely a Danny. I haven't worked out how to change that as yet. Before we go too far, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the many lands on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. For me, I'm on Wurundjeri land as I'm speaking to you. And just as an aside, I feel that there is a danger that acknowledgement of country can become token. And as far as I'm aware, all schools conduct acknowledgement of country at appropriate times and have done so for a while now. And if we are legitimate in our acknowledgement of country, then we need to ensure that our curriculum includes stories, culture, representation of the traditional custodians that we regularly acknowledge. I'll leave that with you to ponder. Here's our agenda for this evening. So for the first part of this presentation, you'll get to hear me speaking, and I'll talk to you a bit about the education state, gradual release of responsibility and workshop model. But probably the feature of this evening is the testimonials. We're going to hear from a number of educators and schools from across our state that I've broken up into 4 areas, into teachers, learning specialists, principal class, and most importantly, our students. So on our YouTube live streaming, there should be a link for you to type into a Padlet. So if you've got any thoughts, questions or comments about anything we cover in this session, I won't be able to be responsive. I'll see if I can get some feedback as we're going, but I will be able to probably use that to inform some of the content that we look at in webinar 2 and definitely when we get to the panel. So try not to be too distracted by the Padlet. There's a fair bit to consider this evening, and I'll give you a couple of occasions between now and 5:30 where we'll have a 3-minute break, and that will probably be the best time for you to share your thinking on the Padlet. So education state, I was a principal back when the education state sort of rolled out, and it's been an ambitious agenda the whole way through. And while most of my work over the last 5 years has still been in Victoria, I have had the opportunity to work in 3 other states and one of the territories too, COVID permitting. And what that opportunity has highlighted to me is how lucky we are to work in the system that we do. No system is perfect, but the key focus within our system is on improving the quality of teaching in order to lift the outcomes for children and young people. So for me, I'm proud and passionate. I was a student that went through our state system, and then I'm also very grateful for all of the opportunities and the capacity that was built in me through our system that's allowed me to do the work that I engage in now. So this evening, as I've mentioned, you're going to get to hear from a range of your colleagues across our system, from a range of different demographics and contexts. The key thing is they've all implemented the workshop model with fantastic results. In fact, some of the educators you're going to hear from are recent finalists and or winners in the Victorian Education Excellence Awards. And I know that there is at least one nomination for this year's awards among those you'll hear from this evening. Not that the awards are what we're in the game for, but it does give hopefully some extra credibility to what you're going to hear tonight. I hope this evening also allows us to celebrate, learn, and hopefully emulate even greater outcomes for our young people, the reason we do what we do. So the Bastow Literacy Suite of offerings, this isn't quite an exhaustive list, but these are the ones that I'd like to refer to. Leading Literacy was part of Bastow's first year, way back in 2010, and out of all of the courses, it is the key one, and what you'll hear from this evening is those schools who've followed the ambitious nature of leading literacy and the long game that the vision that it provides. So there's no short-term fixes in education. It'd be nice if there was, but for those schools that have developed a culture, you know, it really has come in the instances you'll hear tonight from leading literacy and possibly some of these other courses. Literacy data assessment and practice for both primary and secondary, I'll refer to more in our second webinar. Enhancing literacy across secondary disciplines is a new course this year. And literacy local leaders, which really is the flow into this webinar series. Back in 2018, there were a number of a cohort of master trainers that were trained in order to run a course through literacy local leaders within networks. That is often the pathway into leading literacy. And given the pandemic last year, some of our amazing master trainers delivered workshops online, with one of those being on the workshop model. So tonight, I'd like to think that it will be accessible to everybody, whether you've heard workshop model for the first time tonight or whether you are very experienced in it. If you think that you need some more information, you can still access online the recording from the Literacy Local Leaders workshop from last year. So the gradual release of responsibility and the workshop model, many of you will be familiar with probably both, but I would imagine the gradual release of responsibility. These two are essential underpinnings for all of the courses I've just highlighted. And every school has an instructional model. Whether it explicitly states the gradual release of responsibility in that model, if it doesn't, it will still be reflected within that model. It just may have some different labels. The key with the workshop model is that it allows us to enact gradual release of responsibility, and differentiation is another feature of the model. One of the challenges I will probably lay down and get you to consider is, yes, we all have instructional models that are documented and are down on paper. Are they reflected consistently in the practices that we are seeing in our classrooms? So even if you are very familiar with both of these, I'm going to talk to them from my perspective. So all of the schools that you're going to hear from tonight, I do work with independently. And so I'd like to think that there will be some takeaways. So looking at the gradual release of responsibility, first coined way back in 1983, and I think this is really important to come back to, that bottom part, application of the strategy in authentic literacy situations. Arguably what we're most familiar with within our system is this visual representation. And I'm just going to talk to you about this a little bit. One of the key takeaways I want people to have is that the gradual release of responsibility doesn't need to be a linear model. It can be, and often is, when we learn something for the very first time, but we want the gradual release of responsibility to be fluid. We want to bounce up and down the model depending on how our students are tracking. Increasingly, what I get to see across our system is that we're modeling really well, you know, whether it be reading, writing, spelling, vocab, other literacy areas. You know, we're using mentor texts, we're sharing our thinking. But what we need to remember is that we want to model just enough for our students to get a sense of what it is that we want them to do independently in that lesson. So my feedback would be sometimes that we can model too much, and you know, remembering that we can go back and forth. So, and probably with the mentor texts, my advice would be for teachers is yes, use them. Whether they're published authors, whether it's your own writing, whether it's student samples. If it's published authors, I recommend sourcing them yourself, because what is really important is that over a year, our students need to see themselves represented in the text that we use. And we can't get that from an external body. So I recommend reading, you know, and collaborating around published authors with your colleagues and working out, you know, what it is that we want to model. Moving to guided, what I would say in this part of the model is we want to use gradual release of responsibility in our mini lesson, which we'll get to shortly, but we also want to use gradual release of responsibility over the whole lesson, over the day, over the week, over the unit we are studying, over the term, over the semester, over the year, until the end of time, or at least until they graduate from us. So I do think the focus lesson and the I do it, I think we get that. The guided part for me, particularly in the mini lesson, is getting the students to demonstrate to us that they actually know what it is we're asking of them today. And so I don't recommend banning hands up, but we need to ensure that for our students, all of them are actively engaged in this aspect. So you're going to hear tonight from your colleagues, you know, around think, pair, share, turn and talk, and probably cold calling. Students don't know who I'm going to call on, and I'm really going to be listening in to what it is. And don't, understand, then we need to go back and model some more. The collaborative aspect, I think, within the mini lesson is often the part that is neglected. And really, if our students get a sense in the guided part that they understand what it is that we're learning in today's lesson, the collaborative aspect allows us to go deeper. And in the guided and the collaborative, that we really have two options here. Our students can talk about their learning, or they can write about their learning, or we can use a combination. So for me, the collaborative aspect, if we've moved to that part, it can still be the same. If it's turn and talk, then if I use the scenario that I have 24 students, which is hopefully a reasonable scenario, that if I'm in a pair, turning and talking, I might match that pair with another pair. And so we've got a group of 4. So we've got 6 groups of 4 across the class engaging in conversation. And then each group of 4 has 10 minutes to summarize, 10 seconds to summarize what was the summary of their conversation. When our students are feeding back in those 10 seconds, I capture all of the thinking within the classroom in 1 minute, and I'm storing that, whether it be on an anchor chart, whiteboard, screen, And, you also hear about the hits tonight. Those worked examples and those scaffolds are so important. So really we need to see gradual release as those scaffolds, and, between what I'm sharing, what we do together and what we do collaboratively, it really sets our students up to be independent and to be able to go and do it alone. And what I would say is we want that to be the majority of students in our class. You may still have some students at the end of that who still might need some extra support or some confidence, but let's not let that prevent the rest of the students from going on to work independently. And I've just gone the wrong way, apologies. Okay, so the workshop model, one of the things that I have talked to already is that the workshop model really allows us to enact gradual release of responsibility, both right at the start of the lesson, in the mini lesson, but also across the entirety of the lesson and every lesson. So this is what it looks like. I'm going to talk to every section of this. For some of you, this is going to be a bit of a repeat. I am going to put hopefully some different spins on some certain aspects. So let's get into it. So the opening, and I have to say what I'm going to talk to is really that scenario of 24 students, but I'm also thinking around that this is a 60-minute lesson. Now, it may, tonight, this afternoon, we're looking at, we're foundation to year 8. Some lessons might be in the 48 minutes, some might be 72, variations of, for the benefits of tonight, I'm just going to be talking as if it's 60, and you just adjust accordingly. So the opening of the lesson, for me, this is a couple of minutes. It's where we have our learning intention. Now, for me, I make sure that my students are really engaged with the learning intention. Unless they're in foundation or grade 1, they know to come in, they read the learning intention, they start talking to each other about what it is that we're actually learning in this lesson. I also think it's important to share with the students that if I use reading as an example, you're all doing so well as readers. Today's lesson, I think if we focus in on this, that's going to make us even stronger as readers. That we need to use that language, and what I do see from time to time in our system is that learning intentions and success criteria have become a bit of a compliance activity, and we've lost sight as to why we actually do it. 10 years ago, someone decided it was a good idea, and so now we all do it. But it really is highlighting to our students what it is we're learning today and why. So I think it's important for the students to be talking about it. Some of the language that you might want to use in the learning intention, hopefully, is not too simple. It allows students to sort of dive in a little bit. And I think you need a couple of minutes here. For me, I actually tend to not use success criteria at this point in the lesson. I tend to use it at the end of the mini lesson, which is our next part. So mini lesson, so this is where we enact gradual release of responsibility. And for me, this is 10 to 15 minutes. And this is where I'm modeling, but I'm also guided. I'm going to get some feedback from the students that they understand what it is I'm asking of them to do today. And they're demonstrating that to me. And then once we've done that, we're going to go even deeper, and we're going to be collaborative, and we're going to have some summaries around the room around our collective thinking, so that we are going to be able to go and work independently. Now, so the 10 to 15 minutes, I'll put my hand up. So, I still model in classrooms in primary and secondary. It's a challenge, and but it is a challenge that can be achieved. The first time people hear about the workshop model, and particularly the mini lesson, most people say it can't be done. And you're going to hear from a lot of people this evening who can do it and do it successfully. And my feedback would be that if you're currently 35 minutes for this period of time, let's cut it back. Let's try and get it to 24 minutes, and keep working until we can get it into that 10 to 15 minute margin. And sometimes we get it wrong, you know. Best job in the world, hardest job in the world is one of the, you know, my key sayings. And if we go over 15 minutes, it tends to be because we're trying to teach too much. Possibly what we've modeled hasn't, you know, hit the mark. The other thing that I would say is, you know, at 15 minutes, I would probably start winding things up. And we'll look at a catch in a minute, that we do have opportunities through the lesson to, you know, if there is more that I want to explicitly teach and get across to my students, that I have opportunities to do so. The last thing at this point that I'll say around the mini lesson is that if you go too long, Michael Fullan says that we have more brain activity when we are asleep than in a lecture. So it doesn't matter how fantastic the content is at the 22-minute mark of your, you know, not so mini lesson, our students can't retain it. So, you know, there's real implications here. Even if you're really engaging and your students enjoy that, you know, we need to come back to learning. So that's the mini lesson aspect. In terms of work time, for me, this is where we're talking, where our students can apply the learning. So they're working independently. I'm going to say this time is 20 minutes. Now, for those of us in foundation in year one, you know, we're going to be working up towards that. And, you know, you're going to hear from teachers this evening talking about how important it is to set this up, that students are actively engaged and working independently and they're productive during this time. For maybe some of our strongest students, so when we get into years sort of 5 to 8, it may be that your students are, as a collective group, are capable of doing more than 20 minutes. And, you know, if you're in that position, fantastic. So during this 20 minutes, I think the ideal option is that I confer with individual students. I can work with small groups. I think conferring is a real feature, that even if I'm working in small groups, I need to still try and differentiate, even if they have similar needs. We will talk about conferring in more detail in webinar 2 when we're looking at formative assessment, but it is a real feature of the workshop model that if I set it up really well, that it does allow me to work one-on-one. So I'm going to say 20 minutes. So within my lesson at the moment, we've had two minutes for the opening, 15 minutes for the mini lesson, 20 minutes here for the work time. Remembering this is just a guide. So we're sort of sitting around 37 minutes. So a catch, I think we're quite good at this as teachers. It can be planned and unplanned. It might be that for whatever reason, our students are having a fantastic lesson and I'm going to whisper to them that how proud I am and I want them to keep going. Or it could be the reverse, that we're a little bit off today and I say, hey, come on, let's get back onto it. You're better than this. You know, we know the structures, you know, what we agreed to during our independent work time. There may be misconceptions that I've discovered as I've, you know, roamed the classroom or in a conference, in a small group, that I need to flag and I need to address. Or it might be that someone's done some outstanding work that I want to highlight and share with the whole group. How I tend to use the catch is at the end of every conference, I refer back to the success criteria so that the students are thinking about that all the time, you know, throughout. And that probably reminds me that I did neglect to talk to that. At the end of the mini lesson is where I would be doing, I'd be addressing the success criteria. And I want to co-construct that with the students. And the key question is, what evidence do you think you need to demonstrate today to show me that we've been successful? And so we're constantly, you know, making our students active in the learning, giving them ownership. So for me in the catch, you might do a number of different catches throughout the lesson, or you might not do any. So, but I'm going to say that there's a couple of minutes here. So more work time. So you can see in the circle, whether it be 60 minutes for a whole lesson, 72, 48, whatever it might be, there is a lot of time for students to be working and learning and practicing, and for explicit teaching to occur. In my experience, this is the hardest part of the model. But sometimes I think we can overcomplicate it. So what we want to do is that first work time, we want to keep to around 20 minutes, unless a majority of our class, a huge majority of our class, are very productive and strong learners. Because 20 minutes is about tops for our low students. But for our top kids, it's not enough. So if we don't overcomplicate it, what I want my students to do in this aspect of the model is I want them to keep reading, or I want them to keep writing, or whatever it is that they're working on. But for my lower readers or lower writers, I still want them to engage as readers or writers, but it may be that it's more around thinking as a reader, thinking as a writer. And we're going to look at that more again in webinar 2, where we're going to look at readers' notebooks. We'll have discussions around writers' notebooks and other tools that are really important throughout the workshop model, but really come to the fore in this more work time. So often we try, engagement is really a big part of the workshop model, and choice is a huge part, or the strongest predictor for engagement. But we're still the boss as the educators in the room. We're a nice boss, but if our students aren't making good choices, we want to guide them with those choices, or maybe limit those choices. And I think that that's important to consider. So we'll probably pick that up a little bit more when we get to webinar 2, and you may have questions or comments around that to go into the Padlet. The last part of the model is, it's all important, and I sort of get to this part in my presentations where I argue that maybe this is the most important, which I don't think is true, but it often is neglected. And if I stick to that 60-minute scenario and all going well, say we started at 9 o'clock, it's easy as teachers for us to lose track of time. And all of a sudden it's 10 o'clock and the bell goes and our students have to go off to period 2, or we need to switch up in primary from reading to writing, or whatever it might be, and we've lost, or they have to go off to specialist. So we've really lost a real opportunity here. So for me in the debrief, students are talking about actively again, around how they've met the success criteria, what their evidence is. They're giving each other feedback around whether they think, that your evidence does demonstrate that you have been successful. And I'm listening in, and I'm not going to really focus too much on the students I had a conference with, or maybe a strategy group. I'm going to really try and listen in for those students that maybe I didn't get to in today's lesson. But ultimately, I'm going to get feedback from all of them, whether it be thumbs up, 1 to 5, and then again, I'm going to cold call. If students, 5 being that I've had fantastic, I've got fantastic evidence, then I'm going to pick on that student, or and say, well, what's your evidence? You give me a 5. And then they give me fantastic evidence, or maybe they wilt and say, you know what, Danny, maybe really I was a 3. And we want to teach our students that it's okay just to be really honest around, and we know our students, so we know the ones that are maybe going to possibly put some mustard on it, and also maybe underplay how much success they've had. So I think the success criteria is really important here. Also, students might have individual goals that they're talking about on how they've went. And I think it's also really important for students to also be thinking around what else they did well in today's lesson. So the success criteria being the key focus, but our students learn way more than one particular success criteria in any given lesson. So we want them to be thinking about that. In reading it might be what particular comprehension strategies or what thinking did you employ that was really good, or in writing it might be what traits did you do well in the writing that you did today, and really that peer accountability as well. So maybe calling on a few students to sort of say, do you think, your partner was successful today? What's your evidence, or what's their evidence, etc., etc. So again, it's very active. It promotes accountability and independence. And that's really what you're going to hear from your colleagues across the state this evening. So again, that's the workshop model in its entirety. Hopefully I did it justice in that short, brief explanation, and hopefully for those of you that are very experienced, there were some maybe takeaways or some things that you've been pondering as well that you might want to explore further. Okay, so I'm going to give you a 3-minute break at this point, and during this time, you'll see this countdown for 3 minutes. I will start back once the timer is done. Put anything in the Padlet for me, grab a cuppa, have a toilet break, whatever you need to do. But pretty shortly, you're going to get to hear from your colleagues across our state. I'll see you back in a minute. All right, welcome back, everybody. We'll have another one of those 3-minute breaks before we finish up this evening. So hopefully the timing with that is okay from your perspective. So one thing that I haven't talked to yet is, in terms of the workshop model, obviously we're talking it from a reading or writing perspective, or both. And that is the main focus, and that is what you'll be hearing from your colleagues. I also want you to think about, this can work in terms of vocab, spelling, other areas of the curriculum, which many of the schools you hear from do employ. But our focus really is around reading or writing at this point. Here goes our first video. Hopefully it comes through loud and clear.
So as a prep teacher, it enables us to use a really structured approach with our preps. So using our mini lesson, we introduce an explicit skill, and we use the I do, we do, you do method. So we introduce the skill to the children, and then we practice it all together on the floor, and then the children go away and apply that skill at their tables in their own independent work time. So in terms of planning, we have a really collaborative approach. So we plan our lessons all together, so we all have the same learning intention and success criteria, and this makes for a lot greater consistency across our team. Okay, so in prep, the 2 work times really support our learners. So in our first work time, we'll work with a small group of children while the rest of our children are working independently at their tables, and that might be just on drawing a picture and adding labels to that picture, but that allows us to work with our kids that can get started on their writing. And in the second work time, we'll target a different group of children, and that might be through individual conferences or it might be through working with a different small group.
The gradual release model has really helped us in prep, particularly the turn and talk portion of the gradual release, where the kids actually get to check in with each other and see that they're on the right track. Often they can be unsure, a little bit nervous or anxious to share their ideas. So in that turn and talk, where they can do that in a little space with one or two others, really helps to set them on the right track. Conferencing happens right from the beginning in prep. This is really important because it's the opportunity for the teacher and the student to talk about the student's writing at whatever capacity that writing looks like, whether the child is at the beginning stages where they might be stringing some scribbled writing together, which we call pretend writing, or they might actually be stringing some random letters together. They might actually be forming some words. Whatever they're at, their writing is celebrated between the teacher and the student, and then a writing goal is created between the student and the teacher, and then the child knows exactly what they're focusing on for the rest of the week or the fortnight. Another really important part of the writing workshop in prep is the sustained writing period. We aim to get to 10 minutes by sort of mid-year, which most students are well aware of their expectations. They know if the timer hasn't gone off that they are to keep writing and to form another idea.
I've been teaching for 19 years and I started the workshop model 3 years ago. Initially, I was sceptical as to whether the workshop model would work in a prep classroom. I didn't know if prep students would respond to that kind of structure, but I went on a learning walk at a school that had already implemented the workshop model for a few years, and I could see it happening from prep to 6. So with that, I felt really confident that I could implement it into my own classroom.
The best part of having the workshop model and the gradual release model ingrained in our planning and our practice in foundation is that through the structure and routine, our students are immediately empowered to become independent learners. And it might be surprising for some, but I've seen firsthand in foundation how students can thrive in a structured and routine environment, and by holding and enforcing really high expectations for them as learners. When our students know and follow the expectations of the workshop model, we as teachers can be the most effective and efficient with our time. Now, don't get me wrong, it doesn't just happen like this. It's imperative that all of our students know their expectations of them and the teacher during the workshop. It doesn't just happen. In foundation especially, a lot of term 1 is dedicated to developing and enforcing those expectations of the workshop model. You can't conference if kids are moving all over the room being disruptive. You can't run a guided reading if the rest of the students aren't working independently. So for the workshop model to be effective, it has to be set up right.
So celebrating their success when they meet the success criteria and celebrating that as a larger class. I think as a whole school, implementing this practice has allowed really smooth transitions for any staff. So if we have staff working with smaller groups or in specialist times, or as they progress throughout the school, students understand the expectation from every teacher at every year level. So it's been such a huge success.
I think the workshop model is effective because it gives students enough practice time to really promote independent work and to have them drive their own learning. It also helps teachers with differentiating their lessons as well as holding their own focus groups during the lessons. The structure of the workshop model makes it easier for teachers to monitor their students' understanding. We've had a real focus since we've started using the workshop model at Gembrook on improving our student conferences. I feel like the workshop model has made it easy and effective to hold student conferences. The students will go back to their table and be working independently on the task, and the teacher won't have any interruptions when working one-on-one with a student. This allows them to be able to set student learning goals and help talk to their students about where they're going to go next with their learning, and give them feedback on their learning, but also give the students the opportunity to talk with the teacher one-on-one about how they're tracking and how they're going with their learning.
We're in our second year of implementing the workshop model, and we've noticed some very significant changes for the better in teaching and learning. The biggest change I've seen is more so for the consistency of the planning. The workshop model enables us to be able to meet with small groups or one-on-one. This enables some rich, deep learning to occur within the classroom, where students are able to meet with the teacher and work on their individual learning goals. When first learning about the workshop model, the big takeaway for all staff was the timing of the workshop model. Opening a lesson is obviously where the students are able to connect the learning to a unit of study or an overarching goal. In the mini lesson, the teachers know that they've got a short amount of time to try and really make sure that they meet the teaching that has occurred in the planning, but also making sure that they carefully question and guide students towards collaborative practice towards the end of the mini lesson as well, to ensure that the gradual release of responsibility is being met. And then in the work time one, the independent practice is where students get the opportunity to practice that learning.
Definitely for my students, I think the biggest thing that is a benefit for them is choice. They have, in Reader's Workshop, they have so much choice in the books that they read, and in Writer's Workshop they have lots of choice about what they write. They also have choice in the goals that they work on and how they choose to work on and develop those goals in their learning, and they have lots of time to work independently during the workshop model, and it's their job to bring evidence of their goals and the progress they're making on their goals to their conferences, which also helps the teachers a lot. And these conferences are really valuable time for me as a teacher to get to know each of my students as readers and writers and where they're at and how I can help them to grow even stronger in their learning.
By the time students get to Year 5, they've already established what a writer's workshop looks like since prep, and so it's really drilled into them what their expectations are. They will come to their mini lesson ready to go with their writer's notebook, taking on board any notes that they're getting from that explicit teaching. We usually use a mentor text to model what our focus is, always in line with the 6+1 traits. Now we're at the stage where we're co-constructing the success criteria with the students, and using synonyms to really highlight their knowledge of the 6+1 traits and get them to show their understanding. When it is independent writing time, that's where I'll be issuing my conferences, so usually working to a one-to-one basis. But if there is a really clear goal for a group of students, I'll do a small group focus on that instead. When students come to me for a conference, I should say, they know what their expectations are. They know I'm not reading their whole piece of writing. They'll come with a 6+1 focus and then just a snippet of their writing that they want to focus on for that day. When we're having that conference, it's a really rich and open discussion about how to transform their writing and to level it up. And the students will walk away having a goal in mind that we'll co-construct together as well, always again with the 6+1 focus.
So we went to the workshop model because we're looking for consistency across our Prep to 6. We introduced the workshop model firstly into our reading hour, and now we're incorporating that into our other curriculum areas of writing and numeracy. The biggest impact I've seen with my students is the behaviour. So the kids are really settled knowing the routines of the workshop model, and then their engagement within each of the components has been really good.
Workshop model, and when I stopped and thought about what's the most important thing that I could convey about our journey here, I'd have to start with the learning intention and the success criteria. So they sound pretty simple in starting your lessons, but unless you really workshop them with your team, they are the starting point of your lesson. So if you don't get them right, the work that you get at the end of the lesson won't be what you want it to be. So we spent a lot of time, and we're still working on it, in working on the learning intention and the success criteria.
Using the workshop model and the gradual release of responsibility model in all of our lessons allows teachers the opportunity to explicitly teach and, of course, model the skill that's being taught for the lesson. This is really important for student learning,
But the best thing about the model, I believe, is that it maximises individualised learning time and independent learning time, which then the teacher has the opportunity to conference, run small groups, and really hit point of need teaching, and along the way, including formative assessment in that. Our students at our school have been experiencing the workshop model since they were in prep. So as a grade 5-6 teacher, they come to us, they know the routines, they know the high expectations, and they've had the consistency throughout all of their schooling. So they really know their role in the workshop, and it makes our job much easier when they get to grade 5-6, which is excellent.
Implementing the workshop model across our school has really changed the way we teach reading in particular. We decided quite early on in our community of practice to conduct a 3-year staged implementation of the workshop model throughout the school. As teachers though, the mini lesson modelling has made us think about our expectations of students and has helped us differentiate our teaching and learning activities even further. During mini lessons, students are always provided with an opportunity to respond to the mentor text using the reading strategy that has been modelled. It's usually a short task, often using sticky notes to record thinking, but this provides teachers with valuable formative assessment as we move around the room while students are writing or discussing to gain an understanding of the level of mastery of each student. Based on this formative assessment, we're able to form strategy groups for students who may need further support or extension. At the close of the mini lesson, most students are expected to apply the reading comprehension skill to their own text and record their thinking in their reader's notebook. Another really valuable piece of formative assessment. Essentially, the workshop model has provided a faculty-wide focus and process to ensure consistency across all classrooms. Students and teachers alike understand each element of the process, and we all hold each other accountable for following the steps, especially the students.
Okay, so a huge shout out to our teachers who were prepared to put themselves out there for that. I know I'm super grateful, and I think, you know, it's always something that, you know, in terms of presentations and those sorts of things that people are really looking for. So, yeah, huge shout out. I do have access to some bloopers, but for those educators who are part of that and listening, they're safe with me, but thanks again. So probably one of the things that I want to talk to is that people can have the notion that the workshop model is quite rigid, and if you're quite new to it, it may appear that way, but it actually provides you with a lot of flexibility to work within the structure. You also heard some discussion around the hits, and I think you'll hear some of that in some later videos as well, in that if you actually analyse the workshop model, all 10 of the hits would be apparent in any one lesson. And as I started around the education state, there's been so many fantastic initiatives. It is finding the time to embed some of those into our practice, and I would encourage people to go back to the hits because, you know, it's a fantastic resource. Be strength-based, be strength-focused around what you're doing well as an educator or what we're doing well as a team or as a school, and then maybe hone in on one particular area. So I think some of the key points here from the video that I wanted to highlight is really around starting in foundation with high expectations. And, you know, you heard from Mel, Frank, Lauren and Jess, you know, from very different contexts, very different settings, but, you know, right from day one, the students are shown what is the workshop model. And obviously it does take time, and, you know, we do need to set it up, but we have high expectations and we go from day one. I think the consistency from year level to year level, it's just a win-win for everyone involved. I guess you have heard from a range of schools. I think sometimes people can think about, yeah, well, what about my school? Well, my school's different. You know, one of the schools that you're hearing from, or more than one, but one in particular, you know, has an SFOE of around 0.8 and a high EAL contingent. So if they can do it and do it well, everyone can put this in place. So And while there are more primary classrooms, in my experience, that have implemented the workshop model, there is a growing number of secondary classrooms adopting the model with just as much success. And I think you can see that, you know, once students get to the senior ends of primary school, they understand the structure, they understand their role, they're active, they're independent, that it really lends itself for us in secondary to run with that as well. So now you really might want to see it in action. It's all well and good for me to talk about it or for you to hear the other talking heads. I'm more than happy for you to contact me about that. Obviously it is COVID permitting. One of the things that was maybe a request from last year's LLL course was to actually maybe see some of these lessons in action. I am sort of considering and wondering how we might do that, possibly with the panel. It is, you know, foundation to year 8 though, so we'll see what we can do. But if you want to see it in action, I did have my email at the start of the presentation. You'll see it again towards the end. Yeah, just write to me, and hopefully soon enough we will be able to see each other in schools. It is hard for me to, you know, probably go through the Padlet and be responsive. One of the questions that has made its way through is sort of a really good one around, in terms of the workshop model, you know, what about phonics? What about handwriting? What about phonemic awareness, etc., etc.? And the workshop model really does allow for that. There is time and flexibility for that. In workshop 2, part of the formative assessment, particularly around phonics, we will talk to that and connect that to workshop model. And, you know, again, that's maybe something that I'll take on notice to maybe consider for the panel to talk about and share. So, but I thought that was a really good question, that it does, the workshop does really provide for that flexibility. The next point probably is probably a challenge that people again might think is a bridge too far, but there are schools that I work with that do have 3 hours of literacy a day. I guess in answer to that question, which is a primary question, across the week they have 3 hours of literacy, and there is some integration there, but we have a lot of time to be focusing in on literacy. I do believe there's a secondary question as well. So yeah, so in the secondary space, conferring, we definitely are going to talk about conferring in a lot more detail at webinar 2. It is a feature. I think the key thing with conferring is to set the structures up so that students are working independently, so that you can work on one-on-one, and you need to be sitting in a part of the room where you can still see how the rest of the class is going. And particularly at the secondary level and senior primary, we need to train our students around what their role is in the conference, so they come prepared. So I've got a bit of a timetable or a calendar for when students are going to be meeting with me in a conference. So if my what's the day is today? I've lost track. It's Wednesday. So I might have a conference on Friday, so the teacher reminds me on Wednesday that I need to be prepared for that. So I'm going to come to the conference and say, you know, what it is that I think I'm doing well. I might have a goal that I've been working towards. I've got my evidence on how I'm going towards that, what I might need support with. And over time, the students get really comfortable with their role in it, and they really enjoy and love that time. So with secondary, in my experience, you know, our students are more independent, and that's really what we leverage. Another question, probably last one, and then we'll move on. How do people go with conferring or use the model in a class with a wide variety of abilities? Some of my highest kids are done in 2 minutes while I'm still starting a task with my lower kids. We probably finish, that's a really good question. Probably going to finish off with that at the end of today's webinar, that it probably comes down to what tasks we're actually setting our students what they're reading, what they're writing, so that, for those top kids, they are continuing to read or continuing to write and still have that explicit focus. But we might keep rolling. Really good questions, and thank you for that. Remembering, put anything into the Padlet. I'll try and be as responsive as possible, both during the webinar and in webinar 2, and what we cover in the panel on September the 8th. Let's keep going. Okay, so learning specialists. So again, education state, we can take these sorts of things for granted. It's such a fantastic initiative. We are really lucky to have access to this resource. And we need to ensure we're maximising the use of this resource. So, learning specialists need as much time as possible. Whether I'm a big school or a small school or somewhere in between, I need to use that time. So we are going to hear from some learning specialists now around how the important role that they play in leading this work, and probably being a bit of a conduit between the classroom and leadership, the principal class. So anyway, I'll stop talking. Let's listen to our learning specialists.
The last 2 years, we've really added detail to our writing planners. We're beginning to use the language of the gradual release model and explicit teaching and modelled writing within the planners themselves. This is allowing for consistency across different classes within the same year level.
Over time, we've built on our workshop model practice and taken our staff further to now implement a consistent workshop model across the school. Mini lesson, first work time with independent reading or writing and teacher conferences, a catch, second work time with student choice and teacher focus groups, and a sharing or debrief time at the end of every lesson. Ongoing professional development has been a core feature of the way we have implemented workshop model in our school. That's included full day, whole school professional development sessions with the support of external consultants, regular short professional learning sessions after school using tools such as jigsaw readings, discussion protocols, videos of practice and things like that to build our understanding and our knowledge, and a book club group where staff would read a professional text independently and reflect on it and then come together to discuss it on a regular basis. Coaching has also played an essential role in our implementation of the workshop model. Our learning specialists are released from the classroom some days a week so that they can work with teachers in their classrooms, modelling, observing and supporting. That we're able to work with teams to support collaborative planning and guide their thinking towards best practice. We've used learning walks and observations around our school to help us plan for future professional learning and see and maintain the consistency of the workshop model across our school. Because of these strengths, we have seen so much growth in the skills of our students over the last few years since we began implementing the workshop model. And one of my favourites is the fact that our students love reading and writing.
In my role, I often work with teachers on implementing or refining the workshop model within their classroom. An aspect of the workshop model that often needs attention is timing. We find that our explicit teaching can go too long, which can result in disengaged students, and there is less time for guided and independent practice. As a coach, I work with staff on ensuring their explicit teaching is direct, informed, and at max 10 minutes in length. Ensuring our explicit instruction is succinct allows us ample opportunity to move towards guided practice, where we formatively assess students' level of understanding before we move into independent practice. This is another aspect I often work on with teachers, and it is having flexibility when moving between independent, guided, and explicit teaching. We need to understand that we can go back and forth between these three levels depending on student understanding. Often I work with teachers on how they make these decisions on the spot and how to use that formative assessment through questioning, observing, and listening to what students are discussing.
The workshop model supports our work as it gives our staff a really good structure to work with and really clear expectations. So then we can form our learning walks around that model.
which is exactly what we did, because when we went on the learning walks, we went in concentrating on different areas of the workshop model with staff. So at times we were looking at the explicit teaching, the mini lesson, and we could see how that was progressing from class to class. And then we could build on that to the workshop times so that we could also see how that was going and how that engaged the students in the workshop model too.
We've seen really good consistency between year levels. Within their teams, they're all teaching the same thing at the same time. The students are learning the same thing. It also allows them to discuss how the students are learning so that they can then improve on their practice.
And also in that, as we're moving from class to class with consistency, the language being used, the vocabulary was also consistent, and the students are becoming more familiar with that vocabulary in their learning, and they could actually explain to teachers who were in on the learning walks what they were learning and what each of the explicit language was all about.
It's been really good doing the learning walks to see the calm amongst the classrooms. It's also allowed our teachers to take out small groups because their students are on track, they know what they're doing and they know what's expected of them. So they can take either small groups or individuals to conference, which then allows for the differentiation.
It was also good for the students because they understood, or they understand now especially, what the gradual release is all about. So they understand the explicit teaching is their turn for listening and for learning, and that they get to join in with the we do, and then the I do is then where they're showing independently or in small groups or partners the learning that they've had from the explicit teaching. And that was really demonstrated, and the children know that the expectation is there for them to work and to complete the work in the given time.
All right, so huge shout out again to our learning specialists. Thank you so much, all of you, for being prepared to share your experiences with all of us. So it's not on this slide, but the thing that really stands out is culture. If we use our learning specialists really, really well, it probably comes down to that professional learning on that fourth dot point. That Dylan Willem says that there's more to learn in education than is possible in one lifetime. And so there are no quick fixes. And for me, we all work extremely hard in education. We want to get reward for that. And the reward that we're all looking for is improvement in learning outcomes in our students. That's why we're in the game. And it's not NAPLAN, it's not, ATARs, it's none of that. It's whether our students, love reading, love writing, that they're getting better, that they're more productive, that they're more articulate. In some cases, it might be that they start coming to school, So for me, that culture is so important, and that learning culture for us as a collective group, as educators, we're a profession. And, let's embrace the fact that there's always going to be more to learn. And, let's build on the knowledge that we currently have, but let's always be looking to learn more. We need to do it in a balanced way, particularly given the current circumstances. Let's be kind to ourselves, but let's celebrate. Let's acknowledge maybe what we're doing well. We're not good at that. We move on very quick because there's always more. There's always something that we can do better. So let's make sure that we celebrate. Let's have a culture of learning together. We'll talk about principals and their role in that shortly. The role of learning specialists to support planning so that there's consistency, so that there's understanding. Again, they're often the conduit. So if I know what's planning is happening in Year 7 and in Year 8, across teams, then that sets me up well. And the same in primary, that what the foundation team are doing, and maybe the 1-2, that there's some, the scope and sequence there is being addressed. I think it's really good for the monitoring. We heard most of the learning specialists talk about learning walks. We'll hear our principal class talk about that before we're done this evening as well. And that monitoring, it really informs the professional learning that we're engaging in, and can take a number of roles, whether it's something like this, whether it's reading an article, whether it's talking, or that coaching that allows learning specialists or the coach to differentiate how they support a particular staff member. So I think coaching, having been a coach, there might even be some coaches on here this evening. It's such a vital role in schools, and if you use coaching well, I think that's really reflective of the culture that you have. So, and I think the other thing that learning specialists really can provide is that coherence across the whole school, that finger on the pulse, and joining things and bringing them together. So thanks again to the Learning Specialist crew. Really appreciate your generosity there to share. All right, we're going to have 3-minute break. It's 5:06, and then we've got a couple of videos to go, and I will start to wrap things up. Keep using the Padlet. Anything you're thinking, wondering, comments, questions. Not sure I'll be able to respond in tonight's webinar, but remember that I'll do my best to include it in the follow-up sessions. All right, 3 minutes. Okay, welcome back everybody. So 5:09, I think I'm going okay for time. So 5:30 is sort of where we said we'd finish. I'll stick to that. So principal class, we're going to watch a video again in a minute from our principal colleagues. So instructional leadership is so important. Now, I had the privilege of being a Prin for 6 years, an increasingly long time ago. So it's a challenging, it's the toughest position within the whole system, but it is also the most rewarding. And for our PRIN colleagues out there, we get hit over the head about being instructional leaders, and we need to embrace that. It doesn't mean we need to know everything, but our whole focus needs to be around teaching and learning. So the crossing supervisor through to the school council president, through to all of our staff need to know through our actions and our words that teaching and learning is where our focus is. Even if it means at times we have to go and unblock the toilet or, get stuck in meetings and, all the wonderful other things that, that are never ending. But I think it's that culture and what is our focus. And probably that second dot point is that we need to ensure that we're supporting staff to take risks, that it's a safe place to trial practice. We ask our students to do it. How else do we get better? And for me as a principal, I had very few non-negotiables. One was that, that we need to take risks, that we need to get better and always look to improve. So anyway, enough from me. Let's hear what our principal colleagues have to say, and then you'll be back with me.
As an observer, it's wonderful to see teachers be able to have that formative assessment at the end of did that lesson go successfully, or is there something that is needed to be tweaked in the planning component? As a part of our community with the workshop model, the consistency of that model is very apparent when we walk from class to class, and parents and students and teachers can really see that we're all working on a common structure which enables students to move every year to an environment that is very familiar, and they have a great understanding of what the expectations are within a lesson. And so the only new learning for them becomes whatever the skill or learning intention and success criteria is put to them.
There's that explicit teaching component that forms part of every lesson. Providing our students with really guided and supported opportunities to practice skills that have been taught, and securing really a whole school approach to teaching reading and writing that uses that consistent language and consistent structure. I think we've worked hard to shorten our explicit our mini lessons, and of course that leads to increased time for student independent practice and group work.
We have a mixture of graduate and experienced staff, and what we've found with our work around the workshop model is it's really brought a consistency to the teaching and learning that's happening across our school. So we run some very multi-age classrooms, being a smaller rural school. What we've found within the Readers Workshop is that we're really able to differentiate the teaching and learning needs. Our students feel really empowered in their learning and really motivated to extend themselves. The results that we're starting to see with engagement and with the learning outcomes has been really pleasing in what has been just a short implementation period. The Readers Workshop that we have implemented at Elmore Primary School has really given us the platform to develop our teachers' capacity. We can really pinpoint their areas of need. What we're finding is they're self-identifying those areas that they wish to improve on, and not only supporting one another to improve their practice, but also seeking out some appropriate professional learning to assist with that.
Professional development as a leader plays a major part in making sure that the workshop model and the implementation of the workshop model is successful. So at our school, what we did is that we really pulled that workshop model apart section by section, and making sure that the reflection or the share time at the end is reflecting the learning intention and success criteria, and students have got time to speak with each other is something that we know can be forgotten because we run out of time. But for us as a school, we made sure that part of our professional development was when we went on a learning walk, we were only looking at the share time. We wanted to see that there was consistency in share time and what was happening through that share time for our students across the school was consistent and it was meaningful. So the professional development took a number of different ways. That allowed us to make our own school version of the workshop model where we really put the gradual release in there. We put what our kids were doing in there. We looked at what hits could take place through those sections of the model, and we really took ownership of that as a school. That was probably our biggest professional learning, and that happens with new staff every year.
As far as leadership goes, we found the workshop model to be to really support our professional learning. With everyone consistently doing the same thing, it allows leadership and our learning specialists and leading teachers to join the PLC groups and see what is happening in each group and the consistency, and also getting into classrooms and seeing what's happening for the students. That allows us to get a whole school look at what's happening and where the extra professional learning might be needed. But it also allows us to identify where extra support might need to be put in for small groups or for individuals. Our college, like most schools, had an instructional model that formed the framework of how we go about our teaching practice. But we found the workshop model allowed us to take the next step into really refining what happened in our classrooms. It allowed us to really plan in a collaborative way through our PLCs, not only the content of what we were going to be teaching, but everything about what we're going to be teaching, the timing, the planning for differentiation, the gradual release of responsibility of the learning.
The best thing about the workshop model from a principal's point of view is initially, because it's a whole school approach, it provides a consistent environment for the students and our behaviour improved dramatically. One of the strengths of the workshop model for improving our student outcomes has been the ability to differentiate, to use the mini lesson, independent work time and second work time to differentiate within every classroom in our school. At our school, we constantly do learning walks as leaders to gain data to find areas within the workshop that we need to improve in. This has been really important for us because we've continued to build teacher capacity by improving the different elements of the workshop structure that we have, which it could be gradual release responsibility, formative assessment practices, etc.
All right, again, huge shout out to our principal class crew who took the time to prepare those videos for us. Really appreciate it. I hope you did notice Brendan, shout out to Brendan, he had product placement, he had his Basto drink bottle on his desk while he was being videoed. But yeah, thanks everyone. So I guess you can see some of these dot points here that, you know, I think it's fairly straightforward. You know, whole school approach where, you know, there's more difference between classrooms than there often is between schools. So if we can get a whole school approach, the community benefits, you know, learning outcomes, parents, you know, enrollments, induction. Apologies to maybe some of our graduates who have joined tonight. I do have a number of fantastic graduate videos of how they've employed the workshop model and they're doing a fantastic job. So impressed in their first year of teaching. Couldn't squeeze it in to tonight's webinar. But induction is a big part of this. You know, you heard about strategic planning and allocation of resources. So if we're not an instructional leader, if we're not across all of this, we actually don't know how to support our staff and to improve. So, and those regular learning walks, so that we're not just going for a walk around, that they're purposeful and focused. And if we've got that structure to be, that lens to look through, and being, you know, celebrate, so we can feed back to staff. You know, our mini lessons looked really great today, or independent work time, or our conferences, or our debrief. And you will notice that some schools use different language. So, you know, debrief might be share time, whatever it might be, you know, make it your own. I think the other thing is around high expectations, you know, authoritative leadership, that we're highly demanding. And there's nothing wrong with that. That I'm demanding of my staff that we're going to be the best teachers possible. But I'm also highly responsive, that I will do whatever I can within my powers to support you to become the best teacher that you can possibly be. And, you know, I think that's so important. You know, you heard and you can see the consistency between all the videos. And the key thing here is differentiation in the classroom for our students, but also for our staff. So again, you know, thank you to our principal class crew. 10 minutes to go. You know, we need to hear from our students. So we're going to hear from Anushka in grade 4. I chose Anushka because it is a fantastic video, but it is also smack bang, you know, between foundation and year 8, which is what we're focusing in on tonight. And I tried to get the balance between me talking and you watching some videos and some key messages. So just before we get to the video, you know, student agency has been the buzzword in our system. We tend to go through some buzzwords, and I think student agency, whether it's the last couple of years, it's hard to sort of keep a track of time given what we've been through. It might be longer than that, but it's a lot of us are yeah with student agency, but does it actually transfer? And I want you to think about how independent are your students, you know, in foundation, in year 8, whatever year level we're talking about. That at the end of foundation, we may have some students that are still struggling with their independence, but it's not through lack of expectation of becoming independent, and we're just relentless. So anyway, let's hear from Anushka, an impressive young lady.
The Readers and Writers Workshop is where you can improve on yourself as a reader and a writer. You can set goals to really expand yourself.
Mm-hmm. And how do you do that?
You can start by maybe try reading a different book, trying a different genre, maybe try writing different stories, exploring things that you don't know very well.
Great. Anushka, what happens in a Readers and Writers Workshop?
Well, first you would have your mini lesson where you would talk about the lesson, like what we're going to do today, our learning intention and our success criteria. Then we would go and do our independent work, and after that we would have a catch and just like talk about what we've been doing. And then we would have our second work time, which is choice. So, yeah.
Great. And what do you do? What choices are there for second work time?
In reading, you can maybe keep reading, expand on your thinking, maybe write a book talk or a review. In writing, you can just keep writing, maybe plan a story, maybe do some stream of consciousness or something, activity in your writer's notebook.
Great. And what happens after second work time?
After second work time, we might do some sharing and talk with the partner on what we did in the lesson.
Great. Anushka, what do you like about workshop model?
I like how you can be like creative and use your imagination. I like when there's choice because you have a lot of options and you can like do whatever you want to expand yourself and come up with new ideas.
Great. Anushka, you mentioned that workshop model is a great place to work on your goals. How do you set those goals?
Well, you have a conference with your teacher and you talk about a piece of writing or maybe a book you've been reading, and you'd have a little chat about it and you would decide a goal that would suit you.
And then what happens?
and then you would work on that goal, and you'd have another conference with your teacher again and see if you've been working on the goal, and you can choose if you want a new goal or if you just want to stick with the old one to keep on improving on that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anushka.
Thank you.
Yeah, impressive young lady. I think the student voice, and that's really formative assessment where we're going. That if your students can articulate the model and the different elements within it, it shows you that it's really embedded and sustained in the work you're doing. So it really promotes independence. I think the key thing with workshop model is that it allows you to differentiate. Independence is also super important, and if we're using gradual release of responsibility effectively, continually, then it does promote that independence. One thing that, for some of these schools is when they get a CRT in, the students guide the CRT as to how the lesson runs and what we're doing, and, it's super impressive. That idea and notion of choice and guided choice. There is a bit of a disclaimer and a caution there that, choice is really important, but it has to be an intelligent choice. So, we need to ensure that our fingerprints are all over that, and we're guiding, and having resources around that. So really, as the teacher, I'm the facilitator. I'm guiding, questioning, explicitly teaching. I've talked to this already, but we all work super hard in education, but it all becomes worthwhile when we get outcomes as demonstrated just then by Anushka. Regardless of where she benchmarks, what she gets on NAPLAN next year, etc., etc., she clearly loves reading and writing and school. So last point, and I'm going to segue into webinar 2 and where we're going. So if your students understand the structure and their role within the workshop, it really comes down to whether we are stretching our students enough with the tasks we are setting. Because they could do all of this and do really low-level tasks or too higher tasks. So we need to be thinking about that. But if we've got it in place, it allows us to drill down to actually analyse whether that is the case or not. So focusing on the instructional core, so Richard Elmore's work, so we can have the workshop model in place and yet we might not get the expected growth. I doubt it, but we might not get as much growth as we want. And what that comes down to is at the classroom level, that second dot point. The work the students are being asked to do exactly predicts their performance on external measures. So, but by having the workshop in place, it allows us to look at, well, what are we actually asking of our students? Individually, in small groups and collectively, is it enough to stretch them and to, and allow them to grow? And so that's really where we're going in webinar 2 around formative assessment. So, tasks in the sense of cognitive demand, engagement, thinking, etc., because they can often be much lower level tasks than the teachers and administrators think. So we think they're operating at a much higher level than they actually are. So workshop model, if we've got it in place, and remembering that the schools that we looked at and heard from this evening, a number of them have been recent finalists or have won awards, and at least one nomination that I'm aware of for this year. So we're talking high quality practice that the educators that you heard from are engaging in. And we'll hear from them further next week when we look at webinar 2, where we will take this further with formative assessment, which you heard as a thread coming through, but we'll definitely look at it closer and a similar format. So around some videos and some shares from some schools. So I hope that you can join me next week, again from 4 to 5:30, same place, same channel. Here's my email again. Put as much content as you can into the Padlet. If there's anything that I can support you with, whether it be in the webinar series or other, write to me, send me an email. I'll get back to you as soon as possible. But from my perspective, thank you for joining me this evening. good luck with lockdowns, and take care of yourselves. And thanks again for tonight, and I hope to see you next week. Bye, everybody.